a German fool, a Pictish man-eating monster, a fierce, fire-breathing dragon. What are they doing on a bed headboard in a Scottish castle? That's the question. Hello and welcome back to my channel. As you know, I'm James Brown, an historical researcher, independent researcher based in Ayrshire in the southwest of Scotland. Now, for many years I was the custodian, really actually the owner, then latterly the part owner, of a 16th century tower house by the name Baltersan Castle. Originally it was simply Baltersan, which is a Gaelic name. And this is based in the region of Carrick in southern Ayrshire. Now, at Baltersan today, it is simply a ruin, an empty shell. There are walls, but no windows, no floors. However, in its heyday, it would have been well furnished because the owner at the time, the man who actually built the place or caused it to be built, was John Kennedy of Baltersan and Margaret Cathcart, his first wife. Now, very few things have survived, such as life. The house fell into ruin in 1745 or thereabouts. So essentially it wasn't lived in all that long, built in 1584 to 1745. And as we all know, with the passage of time, things get lost, things get broken, things get discarded. We're very fortunate that an architect based in Ayr, a contemporary of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, he visited Crossraguel Abbey, which is a neighbour of Baltersan. Crossraguel Abbey dates from the 13th century, also in ruin. And by good fortune, I think he was the kind of man full of curiosity and decided to wander around the neighbouring farmsteadings and ask questions. And probably during one of those events, a farmer had said, "I've got a big piece of wood that came from the castle, you know." I'm making this up, but it's a likely scenario. So this architect gathers this stuff together. Fortunately, it is now in safekeeping in Ayr. It's not on public display, sadly, but what we do have are two sets of panels in a set of three. Now, the one that I'm using as my logo, so to speak, for my new identity of Baltersan Beg is probably the most interesting. The other carvings are also interesting, of course, but this one to me is the one that has the most interesting narrative. It is unique in my knowledge of historical wood carvings from Scottish historic houses. There is an expert, Professor Bath, who has written about such carvings and so on, and when I presented him with an image of this one, he was fascinated and said, "Never seen the likes of it." So I'm hoping that you, the viewers, might recognise something here and suggest that you could point me in the right direction to find the origin of the strange beasts that are surrounding this portrait of a man. The portrait is in profile, which is very typical of Renaissance style portraits. One of the three panels that this is part of is a man and a woman, an older man and woman, nose to nose, which is very typical if you look at Italian Renaissance pictures, portraits of people who are engaged to be married or are married. They are nose to nose. It's quite a peculiar setup. These carvings are not as fine, of course, as Italian Renaissance carvings that I'm referring to. They're a more humble nature, more naive carvings. But what are they telling us? There's a story here. This wasn't just carved as a bit of fun. There is a story here. There are four beasts surrounding a man. And I'm going to give you my personal interpretation, and that's throwing down the gauntlet to the experts on historic carvings. Can you come up with a better explanation than mine? I'd love to hear from you. So there are four beasts. If we look at the one at the bottom right, a red dragon. Now, a dragon is a symbol of Wales, not Scotland. So let's go anti-clockwise, counterclockwise. The next is another little animal that's got 4 legs. You could say it's a dachshund, a little dog. I don't know the animal, what it is, but it's got a human head. And it's got a bonnet, funnily enough, that matches in design the bonnet worn by the man in the middle of this portrait. Next creature, again, 4-legged beast, appears to have some kind of cloak on its back. The cloak might represent feathers. I'm going to come back to this in a moment. His cap is very interesting. It is a Narrencap, German for foolscap. Now, most of us, before the days of A4 sheets of paper, knew the size of a foolscap sheet of paper, and that comes, same sort of origin with the term foolscap, but that says German origin, that carving. Okay, I don't know, let's find out. The 4th creature is the most interesting. That's a mythical creature as well. That creature is called a manticore, sometimes manticora. And it was a mythical creature that was a man-eater. It apparently had 3 sets of teeth, 3 rows of teeth, I don't know how it managed it, and was most certainly a man-eater. It's mythical and can be found in many civilizations around the world. So how did it reach Ayrshire? How did it reach such country house in 16th century Carrick? There's a mystery, because the mystery will deepen if I had to tell you, and I will tell you, that matches a carving in Meagle Museum in Perthshire, dating from the Pictish era in the 8th century. It matches it. The human head, the big hooked nose, the appearance of the tail. Notice there's something like a band around the tail, almost creating the eye of a raven. So maybe another wee clue as to the past here. So again, you've got this 4-legged beast. So what's my interpretation? What do I think? I believe that this carving, which was part, as I say, of 3, the middle carving of the 3 was simply circular motifs and some diagonals with a kind of Celtic over-under interlacing. I think this was carved in Stirling by possibly Flemish carvers at Stirling Castle. The Stirling Castle heads are so famous, but so beautiful. And spectacular quality. This is a very naive carving and very low relief compared to the Stirling carvings. But I know that John Kennedy of Baltersan, John the Elder, who was John Kennedy of Pennyglen, really, and I think this is his son and heir, John Kennedy of Baltersan. But I think I know the father was in Stirling on a particular occasion, he was maybe attending court, and we know this from a charter evidence, and we can date the very day he was in the garden of the Friars Minor in Stirling, which is very close to the castle, and that dates him as being placed there. I have no evidence that he commissioned carving there, but just a simple connection. There are other connections of John Kennedy of Baltersan with the royal family, and that is that by the 1600s he was a royal servant. He was a servant to King James VI, who in a very few short years after that appointment became King of England in 1603. Now, the carving of the man and wife, nose to nose, tells me that Kennedy and his wife, Helen Kennedy, pardon me for forgetting her name, that's shocking, but here's the parents, and I think the parents are depicting in this roundel, the world is full of danger, son. Out in that wide world, you're going to be confronting fire-breathing dragons in the form of people. They'll burn you up. You're going to be confronted by fools with bells on their cap and bells on their tails, bells and whistles type people who are set to confuse you in life, point you in the wrong direction. And then there's the idiots, the man with the narrencappa, the pointy cap, and they're wearing feathers, coats of feathers. Now, you can see this to this day in German festivals every year, in cities like Rottweil and so on. There are famous parades of the narrens, the fools, and even it's almost a club. It gets started and there's great celebrations and dinners and speeches and people dress in the narrencappa. It's a tradition that we don't have in Scotland, although we have plenty of fools. And it's that fourth one, the man-eating manticore. There you are, son. So you need to be protected from these people. And there is a circle round about the man's head. That is by personal interpretation, but I'm not an expert. Are you? If you know, or you can guide me, how could a German style of cap appear in a Scottish country house? How could an 8th century Pictish depiction of a totally mythical creature appear in a Scottish country house? But not just appear there. What were these 3 panels for? Well, I measured them, and they're the exact width of a single bed. And when one looks at the frame round about these 3 panels, you can see where the pillow was. You can see the wear on these panels. So I'm totally convinced that this was a single bed for the son and heir, and he's quite young at the time, he's not married yet, and it's just warning him of the dangers in the wide world. Now, these panels were saved. They're now on display in a building in Ayr known as Loudon Hall, a 16th century house down next to the Ayr Harbour, in a little street called Boat Vennel, little narrow alleyway and courtyard. Unfortunately, that building is not open to the public, which is a great shame. The other set of 3 panels are equally interesting because in some way there's only a part human depiction. So of this other set of 3, a kind of tripleage, which I think also is the headboard of a bed. It's the exact same width, 39 inches, or is that 1 metre wide, 39 inches in the Old Imperial. One carving is of a serpent with a human, or rather a demonic head, the hooked nose, the goatee beard, the little horn, and then there's the body of a serpent. And again, where did that come from? I have found through research and through the help of the new owner of Baltersan evidence of such a motif in Paris in the 16th century. And there are connections between Baltersan and Paris. The David Kennedy I mentioned earlier, David Kennedy of Pennyglen, went on pilgrimage in 1530 to Amiens near Paris, to the shrine of John the Baptist, which is very important to Scots, the St. John. So did he bring back a book with evidence of illustrations and so on? This is actually well known in historic carvings and so on, that people would copy motifs from books. So I think that's probably where that aspect of the narrencappa and so on have come from, maybe the dragon, but the Pictish carving. So you say, how? Meagle in Perthshire is not very far away from Stirling Castle. So did these Flemish or perhaps French woodcarvers hear the stories of Pictish stones, the carvings of Pictish stones, and say, ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, come on guys, let's go for a wee trip to Perthshire. Because back then, most of these Pictish stones stood in fields. They're now in a museum, but back then, as some are today, even in Aberlemno and such like, the stones are still standing in their original historic position. So that brings me to this wonderful carving, and because things are fugitive, transient, so much has been lost, I decided for my own personal pleasure and for maybe a future generation to create my own heritage piece. And I commissioned a very talented woodcarver, a man by the name of Paul Mowbray. He is also a very talented artist, and he paints things like 16th century ceilings in the manner of the 16th century, and has produced a beautiful piece of work at Fairburn Tower, away up in Ross-shire in the north of Scotland. And Paul took my photographs of this wood carving and created his own version of that, and what a wonderful piece of work it is. So if the other one is lost, hopefully we've got a replica to save it. But that is the story behind what I'm now adopting as my logo. And you might say, what about the colours? What about the colours? Well, believe it or not, these carvings were painted in polychrome. They weren't plain wood. People see this lovely old wood and dark oak and so on. It's, oh, so lovely. No. To the owner at the time, that wood would, in its first carving, would have been biscuit coloured. And I don't mean chocolate biscuit, a light coloured biscuit. But that would look too plain. And they would have the various characters painted in polychrome. And I'm not making this up. Again, within YouTube, you will find many YouTube channels that portray Greek and Roman statues, and through visualization and AI are reproduced in colour as they were originally. So living in a so-called Scottish castle, which is really a tower house, was not a grim thing with bare stone walls. The walls were plastered, they were painted with tempera paint and beautiful murals and so on. The ceilings were brightly coloured with many, many motifs. Perthshire Castle in the north of Scotland is a famous example. So this carving would have been painted in polychrome, and the colours I'm showing are purely my invention. But I think it makes a lovely logo for my new identity as Baltersan Beck. If you have any answers to the questions I'm posing, if you have any ideas, suggestions as to the origin of these carvings, please let me know in the comments. It would be very much appreciated. Thank you.